Welcome to Split Second. If you want to buy the best sleeves or other magic-related accessories, head down to Dragon Shield using the affiliate link below. This week we bring you the second match of our recording with Late a couple weeks ago. Bal is on his Stivet, Seller of Secrets, Rodrigo is playing his Catilda Emil combo deck. Late loves to maddeningly draw cards with his Anya deck, and David wants to give them all some bad creatures with Johnny Renico's Shattered One. This time David won the dice roll and he unfortunately mulliganed down to 6, finding a command tower and an island with a turn 1 Remora to get some draw going and Imperial Seal to pivot his game plan. Cyclonic Rift for some versatile removal and Drinker of Sorrow found its way back again. He sent wrong turn to the bottom. Bal wasn't finding lands and had to mulligan down to 5, finding plenty of them. A lucky Gemstone Caverns, Spiral of Industry and Flooded Strand were kept while he bottomed Misty Rainforest and Verdant Catacombs, relying mostly on Ponder to find something to do with his game plan, and Phantasmal Image to copy a Dockside from Late. Rodrigo mulliganed once and didn't want to go lower, relying on that Carpet of Flowers to get an early Catilda going on, a single command tower for lands but with plenty of tutors. Green Sun Zenith, Eldritch Evolution and Worldly Tutor can all find his combo pieces, while Sarith the Viper's Fang serves as protection and Yasharn already proved to be a really strong stacks piece. Finally, Late kept his first 7, happy enough with a turn to Anya. It's already great to start filtering his hand with those 3 Madness cards. A Mountain into Lotus Petal into Rite of Flame will do just that. Gamble can find him Animate Dead or the World Gorger, whichever he needs to combo later. Ready for the match? Before the game starts, Bal announces his luck with his Gemstone Caverns, exiling a Spiral of Industry, and with this he's down to 3 cards in hand, wishing he had a windfall in the 99. David then starts his turn with a command tower into a Mystic Remora. Bal plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it right away, hoping to shuffle the 2 lands on the bottom randomly into the deck. He finds an Underground Sea and then he does cast his Ponder, triggering Remora and not paying. He finds a Mana Vault that he also casts right away, triggering Remora and he can't pay, hoping to cast his commander next turn. Rodrigo feels he shouldn't stay behind, as Bal just fed a fish, so he plays command tower and casts his Carpet of Flowers, and David just Ancestral Recalled there. Late gets to his turn and he doesn't care about the fish, playing a mountain and casting his Rite of Flame. Remora triggers, but it resolves, so he casts his Lotus Petal for another Remora trigger and casts his commander, Anya Falkenwrath, passing the turn. David is happy enough with those 5 cards and lets the fish sink. He plays a Misty Rainforest and cracks it for an Underground Sea as well. He goes ahead with an Imperial Seal, searching for a Heartless Summoning, a pet card of his, hoping to reduce his commander and random creatures costs to feed his opponents more than last game. He goes to cleanup, discarding 2 and passes. Bal simply draws and passes the turn. Rodrigo draws and adds 1 green with his Carpet trigger. He plays an untapped Temple Garden, paying 2 and then casts Huronblade Elite, which everyone approaches to read. In the end step, Late activates Anya, discarding Blazing Rootwalla and casting it for 0 mana. He still discards 4 more Madness cards, always drawing, stopping at a Cabal Pit, and going to his turn. He plays a Polluted Delta and attacks David for 1, ending his turn. David plays an Otawara Soaring City and casts his Heartless Summoning, which is a great ramp in his deck. Bal gets to his turn and simply draws and passes, hoping the next card will be a land. Rodrigo draws and adds 1 green with his Carpet. He casts his Commander Catilda Dawnheart Prime, entering and triggering his Heronblade, somewhat resembling Bloom Tender for now. With 3 mana, he now casts an Archon of Emeria, and in response, Late cracks his Polluted Delta, but what everyone wasn't counting was on a flashy 1 mana Opposition Agent. Late questions his life choices, and David controls him, searching for a basic swamp. Late still activates Anya, discarding his useless gamble, and proceeds to his turn. He plays a tapped Gemstone Caverns and attacks David with his Rootwalla, who doesn't block, and Late pumps it, hoping David dies faster than Oppo. We're back to David's turn. He plays a basic swamp, exiles through the agent, and casts his commander, Johnny Renico's Shattered One. He attacks Bal for 2 and passes, as he doesn't want to give his Oppo away. Bal draws and casts a Sol Ring, passing the turn. Rodrigo draws and gets 1 green from the Carpet, which he uses to cast Sarith the Viper's Fang. Pretty sad he is flooded with tutors in hand. Huronblade gets bigger, being able to produce more and more mana. He attacks David for 2 in the air, and on his end step Late activates Anya, discarding another random Madness card and Scheming Symmetry, going to his turn. He finally slams down his Dockside Extortionist, entering and creating 4 treasures. He attacks David and passes. He gets to his turn and jumps into combat, attacking Bal for 4. In his second main phase, he casts Drinker of Sorrow and goes to his end step, triggering his commander and giving Drinker of Sorrow to Rodrigo, hoping to slowly delay his board presence. Bal draws and still no lands, so he casts his Phantasmal Image, entering as a copy of Dockside Extortionist. But in response to the trigger, Late activates Anya, discarding Fiery Temper and casting it, targeting Archon of Emeria. He cracks no more treasures and Bal creates 5 treasures, which gets everyone thinking why would you want to unlock Bal's turn from the Rule of Law. He acknowledges he mistimed the activation, but it all boils down to a bigger plan. Bal casts his commander Tivit several secrets resolving and triggering, and Bal votes twice for bribery while everyone else votes for evidence, and he creates 2 treasures and 3 clues. Bal cracks one of the clues right away and finds a Bloodstained Mire, passing the turn. Rodrigo draws and there's still only 1 island in play, but he has more mana than things to do, as 3 cards in his hand are stopped by Oppo. He gets 1 white to cast Hopefully Initiate, triggering his Heron Blade, and he now taps it for 4 green to help cast Yasharn Implacable Hearth. Bal cracks a clue in response but passes priority. With a new random priority, Late activates Anya, discarding a Dark Withering and casting it on Serith, since Rodrigo's other untapped creatures have Hexproof. Rodrigo activates Serith to untap Heron Blade. Late draws and Yasharn resolves, entering and triggering, and it is a mandatory one, so David gets to control Rodrigo while searching for the 2 basics. But Rodrigo felt that Yasharn was more valuable to be in play over any controlled search at this point. He goes to combat and attacks Late with the Drinker and David with Heron Blade, triggering Johnny Rhynchus for a draw, and when Late jumps with the Dockside, Drinker of Sorrow triggers and Rodrigo sacrifices his Carpet of Flowers. In the end step, Late activates Anya, discarding his Imperial Seal, and goes to his turn. He plays a Command Tower and attacks David for 1, simple turns as usual. David gets to his turn, plays an Urza Saga, entering and gaining its first ability, and passes holding some interaction up. Bal draws and takes 1 from the vault. He found a Scrubland and casts a Ledger Shredder. He then follows that with Oswald Fiddlebender, just to trigger Ledger Shredder since he can't use it anytime soon. He discards a Reshape and goes into combat, sending David towards Rodrigo, creating the same old tokens, and Rodrigo takes 6 before going to his turn. He draws and goes straight to combat, sending Drinker of Sorrow towards Late and Yasharn and Heron Blade towards David. David draws 1 from Eurynicus and is not keen on taking 8 damage, so he casts a Dark Ritual and follows it with an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, triggering Shredder to connive and Bal discards a Rhystic Study, as everything else in his hand is better at the moment. While Bal dislikes Yasharn in play, he responds with a Fierce Guardianship and damage connects, so Drinker of Sorrow triggers and Rodrigo floats 2 mana, sacrificing Catilda to it. He then flashes in a Cathar Commando, and in response Late activates Anya once, discarding another uncastable creature due to Yasharn. Commando enters and triggers Heron Blade for another counter. Rodrigo then goes to his second main phase and recasts Catilda, triggering Shredder, and Bal discards a Flusterstorm. Catilda resolves and Heron Blade is now a huge 6/6 as he passes. In the end step though, Late activates Anya, discarding Biting Rain and casting it for its madness cost, clearing David's board and Alpha of Rodrigo's. He still activates Anya, discarding a fetch, and proceeds to his turn. Late holds up on his upkeep, but then decides to do nothing and draws. He plays his Sunscorched Desert.
Só por causa desse trigger, silence.
Ok. Passo. Ok. 32.
One might say it was preemptive, but everyone got to untap after Late, since he would only need to loop World Gorger with the desert as an outlet. David is quite happy that silence wasn't aimed at him. He draws and his Urza Saga against its second ability. He plays a Forest from Exile and casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a City of Brass. So he can now recast his commander Johnny Rhynchus, triggering Shredder, and Bal discards a Transmute Artifact, with only 1 other card in hand. David then passes. Bal draws and takes 1 from the vault. He jumps to combat, sending both flyers towards Rodrigo, telling him if he were to sacrifice his Yasharn, then he would happily attack Late instead. TV triggers and he gets the same votes as usual and passes. On his end step though, Rodrigo casts a Worldly Tutor, but David responds with a hard cast Mental Misstep. Rodrigo draws and plays a Sun Petal Grove. He ponders on his options and casts a Green Sun Zenith X = 3. It resolves and he finds an Augur of Autumn, triggering Heron Blade again, and he hopes to find ways to bypass Drinker of Sorrow's downside. Late cuts and it's a land on top, so he goes into combat and sends both creatures towards Bal for 11 damage. Bal takes it and Rodrigo sacrifices his Sun Petal Grove, ending his turn. Late draws, plays a Bloodstained Mire and simply passes the turn, and they fear a Necromancy instant speed win now. David draws and his Urza Saga against its third ability, and he creates a construct in response, to hopefully have some blockers. He searches for a Sol Ring and then plays a Plains from Exile. That Yasharn has done some work in these games. David still passes with some interaction up, and on his end step Bal casts a Baby Rift on Yasharn, mostly hoping to grow Ledger, mistakenly thinking David had cast a spell already, as he casts his Dispel. He wanted to have his Shredder big enough to block Drinker of Sorrow, but as he draws for the turn, he finds a Lurrus, which he casts right away. It resolves, and he casts his Phantasmal Image from the graveyard, triggering Ledger Shredder, but having mentioned it would be a huge construct, David responds with a Mystic Reflection, targeting Heron Blade from Rodrigo. Bal then draws and discards a City of Brass and goes to combat, sending 10 flying damage to Rodrigo for some more uncrackable clues and treasures. Horyu gets to his turn, draws, and then casts Weather Wayfarer from the top of his library due to Augur of Autumn. He looks at the top card again and it's unplayable, so he jumps to combat, and being dead to commander damage from Baal, he sends all his 4 creatures towards Baal, triggering Irenicus, and David draws. He chump blocks Iron Blade and takes 13 damage. Drinker of Sorrow now triggers, and Horyu does indeed sacrifices Yasharn, as he proceeds to his second main phase and casts an Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing his Weather Wayfarer as an additional cost. Ledger Shredder triggers and later cracks his Bloodstained Mire for a Badlands. Horyu wants to shuffle the top of his library, while most likely finding an Avenmind Sensor to block Tevid. So Baal responds to the Shredder trigger and cracks a clue to draw a card, and then draws and discards a Chrome Mox. Late still responds with a Vampiric Tutor, which he had in hand for some time, and searches for an Animate Dead, mostly hoping to loop Dockside and Cloudstone Curio, which he found in the meanwhile. Late had mentioned he could almost kill Baal, so he doesn't even crack his fetch, and Horyu finds an Eternal Witness to play, triggering Iron Blade and looking at the top card of his deck before putting the Iwit trigger on the stack, targeting his Worldly Tutor. He plays a Boseiju Who Endures from the top of his library, and with the last floating mana, he casts a Worldly Tutor to find a Village Bellringer to the top. He casts the Bellringer from the top of his library, entering and untapping his creatures as well as growing Iron Blade. The top card of his deck is not a mill, unfortunately, so he casts Catilda one last time, growing Iron Blade and passes. In the end step still, later activates Anya, discarding Archfiend of Spite and actually casting it, which was his way to deal with Baal in the air. Shredder triggers, and in response, Baal casts a Limdol's Vault, hoping to find something without spending much life. He found the answers in the top 5 and lets Shredder resolve, drawing and discarding a Wishclaw Talisman, and casting a Mana Drain on a demon. Baal has no more cards in hand and David lets it resolve, since Late is about to untap after a tutor and could still win. Later draws from Anya and still activates her again before going to his turn. He draws and casts an Unmarked Grave right away. David ponders for a second but lets it resolve, and Late searches for Worldgorger Dragon to his graveyard. He suspiciously passes the turn, hinting even more that he could win at instant speed with Necromancy. David draws, plays a snow-covered island and wonders where are all the 20 plus creatures from his deck. He casts his Imposter Mech, entering as a copy of Eternal Witness, and this way he retrieves his Cyclonic Rift to his hand, which he overloads right away, still having 1 mana available. In response though, Late activates Anya, discarding Violent Eruption and dealing 2 damage to Johnny Irenicus and 2 damage directly to David's face. Rift then resolves and David goes to combat, a bit unsure who to attack. He sends 3 damage towards Late and passes. Baal draws and gains 7 colorless mana from the Mana Drain. He starts with a Ledger Shredder so he can cast Sol Ring and trigger the Shredder, discarding a Force of Will. He casts a Mana Vault and then cracks the Bloodstained Mire to find a Tundra. He then casts Tevid once again, entering and creating 2 treasures and 3 clues. He cracks 1 right away to draw and passes the turn. Horyu gets to his turn, plays a Prismatic Vista and casts his Iron Blade Elite, which did a lot of heavy lifting this game. We're back to Late's turn. He draws, plays a Sulphur Springs and recasts his Anya Falkenrath. He follows it with an Animate Dead. However, it's targeting his Dockside Extortionist, hoping to go for the Curio Loop, which is safer than Worldgorger. David knows Rodrigo has an answer and passes priority, and so does Rodrigo. However, once Animate Dead enters the battlefield and triggers, Rodrigo responds to it and casts a Force of Vigor, exiling his Catilda and targeting Animate Dead and Baal's Sol Ring, and this way Dockside Extortionist never gets to see play. We're back to David, and that Psych Rift did get him to play another turn cycle, despite being main phase. He recasts his commander Johnny Irenicus and then attacks Late for 3. He then casts a 1 mana Steel Golem, triggering Shredder, and Baal discards a Marsh Flats. He then goes to his end step and gives Steel Golem to Baal with Irenicus, to deter him to play Lurrus and get access to his graveyard. Baal draws and jumps into combat, sending Tevid towards Rodrigo and Steel Golem to Late, triggering Tevid for 2 more treasures and 3 more clues. Rodrigo dies, but Baal has 1 out to 1 less treasure per combat. In the end of combat step still, Baal casts a Chain of Vapor on the Steel Golem and then ponders on copying it to bounce Anya to remove slot potential from Late, or the Mox Diamond from David, but ends up not copying it. Moving to his second main phase. He casts Lurrus, triggering Shredder and discarding a Thassa's Oracle, having more options available now, although he casts a Wishclaw Talisman from the graveyard through Lurrus. David said to respond to it, as he thinks they'll blow out all interaction with each other and Late will win over that. David casts a Pact of Negation, which he had hinted he had earlier, and Baal responds with his own Pact of Negation. David now fires a Flusterstorm, and with 5 copies, Baal is unable to ever pay 6 to have his pact resolve, and lets it bite the dust. Shredder triggers and he draws and discards a Command Tower. Then, with Swansong and Muddle Mixture at hand, he knows Late enough to have saved Dreadblast or a SWAT all the way to the end of the Stack War, so he lets the pact resolve. This way, he transmutes Muddle Mixture to manually find Time Sieve to his hand. he casts it praying Late's interaction is not any red blast. Late activates Anya in response once, twice, but finds no answers to Time Sieve, so it resolves. Bal activates it sacrificing 4 clues and Mana Vault to gain an extra turn, and shows a loop where he casts Chrome Mox from the graveyard with Lurrus, and once he attacks with Tivit, he generates 4 artifacts that he can sacrifice alongside the Mox with Time Sieve to gain extra turns. Worst case scenario, he could tutor for Academy Manufactory and it would always be deterministic. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Heron Blade Elite generated so much mana this whole game that was crazy, and single-handedly led Rodrigo to crazy chains of creature casts. Yasharn was once again a major stacks piece, dealing Late and Bal. Cyclonic Rift gave the Vit a turn cycle, but eventually Laser Shredder and Lurrus generated enough value for Bal to come back into the game and steal this one. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rap, Mike Purr, Ajimo, Drunken House Cat, V, RJ, Heated Chill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katerina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt, Wicked, Zenon, Newgan Smith, and CJ Wally, our most recent stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing, or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then!